So I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Special Board of Education meeting in open session for Monday, June 5th, 2017. Okay, first item on the agenda tonight will be public appearances. And we do have one speaker for tonight. And that person is, I'm trying to figure it, let me try this name before you tell me. Sarah is either Newman-Swander or Noonan-Swander? Newman-Swander. Okay, you can have a seat. Please turn on the green light. And you'll have up to 3 minutes to state your... Yes, please. All right, begin when you...
Okay, so I'm Sarah Neuenschwander. I'm a counselor, a high school counselor at West. And I have been in the district 12 years. I've been a counselor for 20 years. And I'm here to discuss, because I found out that you were going to be discussing the leave of absence policies for teachers, et cetera, tonight. And so I have a personal stake in this, as I've just asked for a leave of absence after 12 years in the district and was denied, and I've worked my way through the process. Human Resources, Dr. Cheatham was very kind and was responsive to me. And then I reached out to a school board member that I knew. I never asked for favors in my 12 years, but I just asked for some guidance, and he said to come tonight. So my take on this is from a counselor perspective, not a teacher perspective. And they're very different in the schools. So I've been told that staffing is really difficult and leave of absences are difficult, and I understand that. I've had multiple ones in my department, so I understand that. I feel like in the counseling role, though, they're very crucial. And from what I've experienced, the people that we have had, the quality of candidates that we have had that have taken leave of absence positions in the counseling department have been of the highest quality. We've hired 4 of them, and if we haven't hired them, they have been absorbed somewhere else in the district. And the reason I feel like that temporary position is really important is because you get a chance to see and evaluate their skills with the kids, because that counselor role is all about relationships. Not that teachers aren't, but that's what we're about. We're about trust building and relationships. And people can have all the theories, but if they can't project that to the kids and they're not trustworthy, that's really an issue. And so if you get a person in there permanently, you have a harder time deciding what their skills are if you don't have that time to evaluate them. So while I feel like I know staffing is really difficult, I think in that counseling position, it's really a helpful thing to have a person on a leave of absence. And we've seen it work time and time again. And I have, as I said, 4 or 5 names of people that I have trained that we have also hired. So I just wanted you to have that perspective, because I know you're looking globally, and I do feel like counseling and support services is a unique perspective in that position, and to look at them maybe individually as well. And as I said, I've been in the field for a long time and have seen a lot of different counselors come and go. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's our solo speaker for the night, so that concludes our speaking public appearances for this evening. Next item on the agenda is to approve minutes, and I'll move to approve the minutes from the special meeting in open session dated April 3rd, 2017.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, motion carries 7-0. Okay, our main topic for tonight is we're here to gather input on the employee handbook. I think it's more the process, although we have it written down here as handbook review committee, but I think it's sort of the process of gathering information. Would you like to comment, Jen, as we get started?
Yeah, we just recently made a change to the process for the annual revisions to the employee handbook by including a new step where we gather board input on the front end before we head into handbook talks over the summer. So this is us actually putting that new process into place. So in the next half an hour or so, what we'd like to do is share with you our thoughts. Heidi and Deirdre, if you want to join us. on what we were planning on bringing to our handbook discussions with our employee union partners this summer. And like I said, this is your opportunity to weigh in. What else might you want us to be thinking about? What would you like to see us discuss in addition to what we've already kind of scoped out? So yeah, we're just putting this new process into action. And with that said, if it's okay with you, James, we'll just go ahead and pass it right over to Deirdre and Heidi.
Sounds good.
So as Jen said, this is the time when we're going to get feedback from you before we head into the discussions during the summer. And what happens during the summer is the handbook review committee meets. We discuss the various issues that we have in front of us. On those issues where we reach consensus, we bring those to Jen. She brings those to you. If there's areas where we don't reach consensus, then Jen determines what will or will not be brought forward to the board for any changes. And just as a reminder, when we are discussing the changes, in general, they're to be effective for the following school year, so they'd be effective for the 18-19 school year. But there are times where we might all agree that we think it should be applicable now, so we would recommend to you that it become effective immediately. And generally, we finish our discussions during the summer to bring those recommendations to you in the fall, so you have time to make a decision before it's budget time, and that way employees also know going into the following school year if there's going to be changes that would impact them, that might impact decisions they want to make regarding, whether they retire or not. They have plenty of forewarning. So that's why we try to get these, any changes that might or be recommended to you in the fall. And just as another reminder, this was our very first year under the handbook. So we're kind of learning to live with the terms and seeing how it works. So it's not like we're looking to make any wholesale, changes to anything at this time, as you can see by the kind of short list that we gave you, solely because we haven't had a whole lot of time to live with it to see if there's really things that we think need to be changed. So we gave you just a brief overview of 4 basic areas that we know we would like to bring forward to the Handbook Review Committee, and one is around benefit issues. The first one has to do with the start and stop date of benefits. Currently, under the terms of the handbook, for insurance, it's available the first day following 1 month of employment. And for a lot of people, that might end up there being a gap from when they leave their other job to when insurance would start with us. So what we would kind of want to be looking to do, it would be available for the first of the month following your date of hire. So that would be a shorter period of time. Maybe it might make us more attractive to people looking to come here. We all now have vision and short-term disability, so we would just add that to the list of benefits that we have available to us. And just looking for some flexibility around the open enrollment dates. Instead of having dates specifically specified, it's just that we will have open enrollment. We'd continue to have it in the fall, but we're just looking not to have specific dates included in the handbook. With regard to the content of staff-only days, which are basically professional development days, we're looking to clarify how the structure of those days is determined. There's currently an issue around whether central office requiring some specific content on those days for some of our intensive support schools. So we want to have some further conversations around that piece of it. And do you want to do the compensation piece?
So as you all know, that we had a compensation study that was done, and part of our recommendations were specific to salary and wage work. I sent an update to the board back in September of last year that really outlined the next steps that we were thinking about specifically for the work groups, which included the fact that we would be looking at shifts to the teacher's salary schedule in the 2017 handbook process, which is where we are right now. So the 3 kind of big areas specific to that we would really want to continue to do work on, and this is also what came out of the C&J study, is really simplifying that salary schedule, changing that curve so that teachers realize their earning potential much earlier on, and then also taking a look at how do we align professional development that we want to see in the district with how we might compensate staff. So those are kind of the 3 big things within the teacher salary schedule that we'd be looking at making some changes to.
And the last area revolves around compensation for 504 reevaluations. There's currently some concerns that have been raised about the amount of work that is required for a 504 is very different than for an IEP. And that by providing this compensation, there's been some inequity regarding certain folks who attend don't get compensation. So we think we need to have some additional conversations around what makes the most sense and what would be equitable for all the participants in that process.
I'll just say one thing before we pass it back to you, James, for to open it up for discussion, and that is 3 of 4 of these general bucket areas I would call just kind of technical fixes, things that we learned over this past year of implementation, our pain points that we just think need to be addressed. And one, the compensation area, I think is the more strategic of the discussion areas, meaning what can we do to improve upon where we are to help our employees be better equipped to perform their jobs well. So that's a more strategic bucket of work and more long-term, where we're kind of thinking of phasing in components over time. So just to differentiate a little bit.
That's right.
So at this point, this is what's on our mind. We'll open it up or give it back to you, James, for questions about what we've outlined here, as well as additional input, thoughts on what you might want us to talk about with our union partners this summer.
All right, thanks for the information. We'll start off, Nikki.
You mentioned the 504 plans and the amount of compensation, and I do realize how long those plans are. Are we currently also on IEPs providing compensation already on those?
Yeah, we provide compensation for IEPs.
So this would only raise one, or it would only increase the 504, though, correct?
It's just a conversation around who's getting the compensation and how much it should be for the 504s. It doesn't change anything for that.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Loomis.
Yeah, I'm cool with these things. I had 2 questions. One, thanks for our guests for coming today. The process to request a leave is in the handbook. Does it describe why one would be denied? And could you tell me why one would be denied?
It would depend on what kind of leave it was. I mean, there's
I
certain.
don't want to know the specific here. I just was curious as to why a leave of absence would be denied. Can you give me an example of why one would be denied?
Well, one could be denied because it doesn't fit within the parameters of the leave being allowed.
What are allowed ones then?
Well,
Do you know what those are? I'm sure I don't have the handbook in
right,
front of me.
for unpaid leaves, there's an unpaid medical leave, unpaid child rearing leave, and then what's considered other. And that includes anything other than that.
Make your case. And so those are any parameters. So do you have any idea how many get asked for in a year and how many get denied? Is it usual to deny these, or, it seems like these things are pretty straightforward with most people. There's a reason they're asking for them, and other covers a lot of ground, and why would we deny one? Shouldn't be that difficult, I would assume.
We certainly, we know how many, we just don't have that data right now, but we could certainly offer that to the board. I think part of the decision-making process is really looking at what would entail backfilling a position. And so when we have somebody that goes on a leave above and beyond what is allowable, we have to fill those positions with extended long-term subs. And so in some positions, it's more difficult to do that. And we have to take that into consideration. So in determining whether a leave is approved or not, there's a conversation that happens with the principal along with HR, and those two groups or parties or individuals will make the decision as to whether or not a leave is approved.
Is there an appeal?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. Seems like there's a lot of councils that could fill in that. I'm not going to bring up your specific situations here. I'm just curious as to why one would be denied. The other question I have is, last week we received 2 emails to the board about staff believing that job sharing was no longer allowed. And in both cases, I think the superintendent answered back, says, yeah, it is. It's just, so this confusion that somehow this message has gotten across, is that in the handbook? I feel, I wasn't aware that we had job sharing or didn't have it. I know that a lot of, it's a standard practice for many private businesses. I don't think there's any objection here to it. And so I was curious as to why people would think we don't have it anymore.
There is specific language in the handbook that allows for job shares, and that has not changed.
Well, if 2 people in different schools think we don't have it, I think there's some clarification needs to get put out to people.
Yeah, I think the confusion, oh, go ahead, Deirdre.
I was just going to say, it is in the handbook. It is up to, principals have the right to decide whether or not they're going to allow a job share, and that may be where some of the confusion is coming from. There's been a lot of conversation around the type of job shares and what is more appropriate and what isn't. If there is a job share within a particular classroom, that becomes a little bit more difficult in terms of consistency of instruction, et cetera. So there was discussion during the budget process around job sharing, and principals had some decisions to make during the workbook and allocation process, whether or not they were going to move forward with continuing particular job shares in their schools. So there were some decisions based on that, whether or not they would continue. But it is in the handbook. But the principals did make some decisions about job shares over this last year. And there were some that discontinued job shares within their school buildings.
Yeah, so job sharing is allowed, but it is at the principal's discretion to approve or not approve a job share. And this is just the natural balance that we always have to find between wanting to accommodate the needs of our employees, which we want to do. We want to try to be as flexible as we can, and to make sure that the students in a particular classroom are getting what they need to be successful. And so there's not an exact science here, right? We just have to weigh all the factors in a particular situation and allow our principals to make the best possible decision. So I think that may be where some of the confusion is coming from.
Can we communicate that to people?
Absolutely. We can better communicate that to
Sometime
people.
soon before, because 2 people means probably a lot more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and the handbook is new, right? So I think we always have to do,
Prior to that, wasn't it?
pardon me?
It was in the contract. We've had this for years.
Yeah, but this principal discretion issue has been tightened up in the past year. That's my understanding, Deirdre. So, and that is where the confusion, I think, is coming from. And so, yes, and we
Yeah.
still need to better
And-
clarify.
And just to say, some of it, in terms of the principal decision, is aligned to results and what they're seeing happening in their classrooms. And if there's a job share that's happening and they're not seeing the results that they're expecting to see, that may be a time where they would choose to not.
I got no problem with that.
Yeah.
But,
Just want
the
to
issue is
clarify.
that sometimes little tweaks get made, little changes get made, and people thinking one thing because there's discussion about it.
Yep.
Similarly to, we've had people misunderstand that we're thinking middle school starting time is
Right,
happening
starting next year.
and
Yep.
Just because we've discussed it,
Communication.
it's just, so I think we need to, when we communicate, we have to make it clear and maybe definitive at some points, because otherwise people are out there, and I've been asked by
Yeah.
people about, hey, man, I can't get my kid to school at that time, you can't do that. I said, well, we're not. I
Right.
said, oh, I thought they were. So this stuff gets on a life of its own sometimes. I think we can get ahead of that by being more clear and more often clear.
Yeah. And Heidi, just as long as we're on this topic of leaves, can you clarify for the board that what's in the handbook that allows an employee to go on a 1-year leave, for instance? I'm not sure the dean's question about under what circumstances would a leave be denied. It sounds to me like a leave would be denied if the request was outside of the parameters of what's in the handbook, right? If it was a special request for extending a leave beyond the 1 year, as an example. But help us understand a little bit more about the rules of accepting or denying a leave.
Well, with regard to the unpaid leave.
Yeah.
For what I'm going to call the other category, those are discretionary leaves. So that would be the difference between, like, if someone wanted a 1-year child rearing leave, and they request it within the timeframes and the parameters, they get it. I mean, or if you're, for a medical leave, if you have medical documentation, you get the medical leave. But the other leaves, those are discretionary. So those are the ones, like Deirdre said, you'd be looking at all the factors around that, having a conversation with the principal. Are we able to get a good quality substitute? You know, is this, those would be the considerations that would be taken into account. That could, okay.
Okay, I'd like to keep us on time here tonight, so, Mr. Merckx, first of all, are you done, Mr. Lewis?
Yeah.
Okay, TJ?
Yeah, I'd like to stay on leaves for a minute, and then I've got 4 or 5 other things here. But one of the things is, as you said, that the section on other leaves it's pretty. There's not a lot there in the handbook, and I guess one of the things I would suggest for the negotiating table, I'm sorry, we don't use the word negotiation, for the joint committee table would be to discuss some kind of standard, some kind of rubric around deciding about leaves, so that. Number one is, I think that leaves and flexibility and job shares and things like that are the kind of things that both attract and help retain people. And particularly in leaves, and I understand that counselors have a different, that filling that position is different than filling a second-grade teacher position. And in terms of defining what kind of job you have when you come back, I don't know whether, our current policy is that you get the job at the school you had, but perhaps we could introduce more flexibility by saying, hey, look, we'll give you a job. We're just not, we can't necessarily give you that job back, kind of leave, kind of thing. But to bring that to the table, that would be one of the things I would list. And I think that, Sarah is the second excellent, absolute asset to this district that I know who has been turned down for leaves in the last couple of years. And these are people who, if there is any, I can't imagine a future where we wouldn't want these people to be part of our district. And if by introducing flexibility and using leaves to increase the odds that they come back to us, to me, unless it's, it's absolutely kind of the position where it's like, this is, we have one of these in the district, and if we can't fill it while you're on leave, and it's an absolute, one, I can't imagine, just, that both of the people I have in mind are just people who are just assets. And, and as an organization, these are people who we want to keep, and if they feel that they have to consider leaving or leave temporarily, they're people we want to come back, because, and maybe there's other people who've taken leaves or been turned down for leaves who aren't those kind of assets. I just, I'm just going from personal experience with 2 excellent people who I value highly. So if I can add that to the list to bring to the table, that would be great. And again, if MTIs, if our employees aren't interested in having this a topic of discussion, then we leave it at that. But I do think that the larger issue of how can we be a more friendly, welcoming workplace in non-monetary ways, I think that these certainly play into these, both job share and this, and perhaps perhaps again rubrics around job share. And I understand why these would be turned down. I'm not saying they should always be granted, but just some kind of standards in place, and that everybody has a discussion of, well, what are reasonable reasons to turn these down? And so that's it. And I think I'm just going to go with kind of the list of things that I want to suggest at this point. And one is on high school workloads. Currently, we use number of classes assigned and/or Carnegie units, and perhaps we would want to figure in the formula number of students who you are teaching, because as someone who teaches, there is the time you spend in the classroom, and that is the number of classes and Carnegie units. there's also the time you spend grading, the time you spend evaluating, the time you spend doing individual meetings, and that's a huge part of the workload. And if one, and if we defined a full-time person as someone who had 130 students, and then an overload would be 140 or something like that. Other districts do this. I don't know if it's something, again, that our employees would be interested in, but I think it would be worth at least discussing. My understanding is I appreciate this meeting tonight and the change process. My understanding from last year's discussion around the process was that in practice, our employees could bring things to the table that they were interested in, but the handbook itself doesn't read that way. The handbook says that the administration brings things to the table, and the employees can only react to those. And so that's what the practice does not reflect what the handbook language says. And so if we can have the handbook language reflect the practice, I think that would be good. Again, I understand the practice has been that people bring to the table, and I appreciate that that's been done. I think everyone here agrees that's the right way to do things, but the handbook itself doesn't reflect that. So that's something, and I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. And the last thing is extracurricular and co-curricular compensation. Two pieces on that. One is just the general big, huge topic of it, right? We haven't made changes in that in a while, and certain activities and things have grown and others have withered away. And so I think that just kind of, and then the other question is that, we have this like 4% of base salary kind of formula, and just how these are working for our staff and for our students, I think is a real question. And then the second is more specifically about there are things that have been historically slotted into certain levels. Forensics is the one that is at the top of my list that has grown appreciably since it was slotted in that place. And yet it's still, I don't know, 4%, 5%. It's really low. And in fact, the workload and now that now there's tournaments that stretch the whole year and this and that. And so I think that just kind of making sure that that stuff's up to date in some way would be other thing I would add. And then the last thing isn't something I'd add, but on the cross and justice compensation recommendations, if we could get a little more detail on what's meant by that, because you talked a little bit about bending the curve in terms of earning in your things. To start with, that particular graph, I don't think the curve was that out of line at that point, and I think that having upped beginning pay, that it might actually be in line at this point. So if we can get like an update especially in light of the actions around starting pay, and on what's meant by bending that curve in particular. And then on compensation, I also, and every time we talk compensation, I always say this, is that I think that some kinds of either stipends, bonuses, extra pay for our higher needs schools, however defined, is something that I'm always, if our staff is interested in that, I certainly am. And if our staff is not interested in that, then I will just bring it up next time and hope somebody takes that little worm that I'm fishing out there with. So that's my list. Oh, last thing, I'm sorry. I take it that the custodians hiring issue is not on your list this year? Because it's not on your list this year. Because it's not on, all right, I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Marks. Anyone have, Madam Vice President?
Great. Good title. I agree with TJ. Something that I was interested in the compensation study was around providing stipends or increased pay for people who want to move either into high needs schools or looking at those key transition years like what we talked about, the kindergarten, the 5th, 6th grade, 9th grade. That's just something I think that we should be looking at. And then also, I know we focused on the starting pay and we're looking at reaching earning potential earlier, but I would like to know what we're looking at as far as with our more seasoned staff and retaining them and making sure they're adequately paid And if that's part of the discussion, if that's something that educators and staff are interested in.
Yeah, so just two things on just TJ's question about the salary curve. Really, when we go back to the recommendations that Cross and Joftis shared specifically, it was really looking at years between years 5 and 8 and moving what was existing on the salary schedule, because obviously at that time we had no money to work with. But it was just moving that money up sooner so that folks could realize the potential. Ideally, when we think and we envision a salary schedule, we're looking at all of our staff, right? And if we had dollars to work with, we would be increasing beginning teacher pay. We would be moving that salary schedule. We'd be moving that curve up so that people could realize that potential much earlier. And we would also be putting dollars into making sure that we retained our veteran teachers. So if we had all the money to work with, that's absolutely what we would want to do, because we want to be able to retain and support all of our teachers. Now, the challenge that it comes for us is when we have to start picking and choosing, right? What do we do? But so when we go in and have these conversations, we're absolutely looking at all of that, and we can mock all of that up and share an example of what that would look like. And then it's just a matter of making a decision about if we had dollars to work with, where we would put those.
Okay.
So just to kind of add into the, I guess, strategic piece here, I'm pretty excited about figuring out how to make our district one of the best places to work. I think kind of in the country, education, not education. I think we have a lot of the tools we need to do that. So maybe kind of just 3 principles that I've been trying to keep in mind. One, on compensation. I'm very interested in understanding what levers we can use, whether that is kind of across the board increases, stipends for either hard to find skills, teachers of color, high need schools, whatever the kind of slice is, and as well as other things like loan forgiveness, to the degree that that's applicable. So just kind of financially, there's a bucket there I'd like to be pretty aggressive on to the degree we can. The second, around flexibility, I think, overall our workforce in every sector is becoming more flexible. 40% of the workforce is going to be not full-time, part-time, or kind of contract workers in the next couple of years. So I think just to keep up, we need to be pretty creative about how we think about that. And I think we're actually an industry that has the ability to be incredibly creative because we run on an annual cycle and we have kind of like skill sets for a lot of our roles. So I would love to be, I don't know what those answers are, but I would love to be very open to how to be flexible across job sharing, sabbaticals, leaves, paternity leave, maternity leave, et cetera. And then the last, just to throw out there, is sort of that employee experience and how to think about our employees. And I don't know how much of this lives in the handbook process versus not, but there's a lot of non-financial things that we can do to just kind of put on our employee hat and experience how they experience us, from the first touch all the way through kind of hiring and kind of working their way through the district. And I think that's a hard thing to get our head around. That's going to be a couple-year process, but I'd love to be pretty thoughtful about how our employees experience kind of their role and how to integrate you guys with teaching and learning and vice versa. And there may be things that live in the handbook process that come from our union partners as well on that, but I think that's an important piece of how we think about retention and job satisfaction. So those 3 things: compensation, flexibility, and employee experience. And overall, just, I would love to be looking at what other districts are doing in the education K through 12 world, but also non-education. I mean, we are competing in a world where, every year fewer teachers are trained, and a lot of folks leave teaching after the first couple of years. So we're definitely competing with people outside of this sector. So I think we should feel free to pull ideas from outside of the sector on how to keep our employees really excited to come to work every day. So.
Okay. I think everyone's had a chance to speak up on this, so I guess the only comment I'll make is that as we move forward with this pre-decisional input process, that as you bring these areas of consideration for review to the board, maybe a little bit of background ahead of time. I appreciate the explanations you all made today. They were fine. For example, provide flexibility for open enrollment dates. Maybe 2 or 3 more sentences right in the document that gives you a chance to, and the board a chance to think about these further ahead of time. So, I think then that everyone's had the opportunity to weigh in, and Jen, any comments from you or any staff before I call for adjournment?
Just incredibly helpful. I'm glad we did this. Yeah, I'm excited about what we'll accomplish through handbook talks this year.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Stay
you.
tuned.
Okay, I'll move adjournment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, we're adjourned. Motion carried 7-0.
Are we ready to start right away? Okay, 5 minutes. Nikki requested. Oh, I knew these were coming. Instruction Work Group meeting of the Madison Metropolitan School District Board of Education. And the first order of business is public comments. And we have a number of speakers tonight, some of whom I know have spoken before, some of whom may have not. For those of you who have not, you have 3 minutes to speak. Let me know when you're ready, and I will start the timer. I will call the first name and then the second name so that you can be ready to come up, sit at the end of the table. There's microphones there. Please make sure that the green light is on by pressing the button on the microphone. The first ones are Oha Skyba and Jim Shaw. And I take it you're together and for 3 minutes, or that's always confusing when people sign up this way. Okay, and then after that will be Chris Gomez-Schmidt, who I know knows the rules.
So just one little, these aren't really microphones, they're just recorders. So speak so old guy ears can hear you.
I naturally speak up because I have those same ears that you do.
Thanks.
My name is Jim Shaw, and I am the interim director of the Wisconsin Center for Academically Talented Youth at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, an outreach program. And I'm there on a temporary basis because the university is rethinking gifted and talented education, just as you are. And we are as concerned about excellence as we are about equity. And we too think that there has to be efforts, and we know, we're confident you're going to be leading those efforts to include more diverse children among our talented youth and get them the support that they need. All talented kids need support. We want excellence for our best students, for our students who are developing and growing. But we are also concerned that we need to include a more diverse population, and we know Madison is committed to that, Madison Public Schools. So we're here just to express our willingness to partner with you and hope that we can work together, partner on this effort to be more inclusive and gifted education.
Just to add to this, we're really open to meaningful contribution to this discussion and the effort that Advanced Learner Group is undergoing. We have an area of direct services that sometimes align with specific offerings inside the Madison Metropolitan School District and sometimes go outside of it, but we just wanted to voice the willingness to work together, and we have a history of serving kids from Madison through pretty much multiple of our initiatives, and we also are willing to add representation and invite them to our discussion on our engagement, so that would be helpful for us. We definitely are open to also exploring potential partnerships, official partnerships with Madison School District for kind of uniting and strengthening each other's efforts around specific offerings and curricular offerings and programs that we have available, or potential of developing new serving the needs of the kids in multiple areas. So that's all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This reset. Yeah, it's a new thing. Chris Gomez-Schmidt, followed by Jennifer Wang. 1, 2, 3.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to discuss advanced learning tonight. This has been a marathon and not a sprint, and it will continue to be so. But I really look forward to working all of us together to try to move this department and the work of this department forward. I'd like to take a minute just to say thank you to Lori Fellens, who filled in this year as the interim director, sort of held all the pieces together as Ethan Nettersham was arriving. And so I'm thankful to Lori for doing that, and glad to have Ethan on board and working in this position. That being said, I just want to clarify again, when we talk about advanced learning, an IRT the other day, I was talking to her and she asked me, well, what is advanced learning? And I said, oh, we're having that discussion still. Okay, let's really try to figure that out, because when we say advanced learning, what are we talking about? And I just want to sort of clarify that it's not a static program with a fixed amount of spaces available for only the highest achieving students. when we're talking about advanced learning, we're going beyond this sort of gifted definition where we're just looking for those very top students. We are actually broadening this so that you're asking a different question. So once students reach or exceed grade level standards, what's the instruction that schools have to provide to keep them challenged in their learning and to move them forward? And we need to take a look at that, and we need to look at students who are achieving highly already. But we also have to look at students who have the potential to achieve more highly if we put the instructional practices in place that they can access. Because I think a lot more students will rise to the occasion of advanced learning if we have systems in place in every school to address that. And the equity piece is another huge piece of that. How are we going to get students from groups that aren't right now, they don't have the numbers that we would expect given the proportion of those students in our district. So the equity piece is really important, and the piece of how we do this instructionally and how we help schools do it instructionally, not just expect them to do it, but how we're going to support them and make sure that it happens in every school in the district. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Jennifer Wang, followed by Mike Teitbaum.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Wong, and I'm currently
sorry.
a parent, and I've been a parent of a child in the school system for over 10 years. I have 3 children in the Madison schools, one at West High, one at Hamilton, and one about to graduate from Lincoln Elementary. And I've been proud to serve as the PTO president for Midvale Lincoln for the past 6 years. I have a decade's worth of experience as a parent, volunteering in classrooms, sitting in on site-based leadership team meetings, and attending more PTO meetings than could be possibly imagined. And I come here tonight to ask the school board to prioritize reducing class sizes at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. First, the benefits of small class size are unassailable. As students at Midvale and Lincoln Elementary, my children have benefited significantly from small class sizes. In 2007, when my daughter started kindergarten, she was fortunate enough to be in a class of 14, and where the teacher was supported by enough staff to produce a teacher-student ratio that rivaled any private school in the area. My children spent their formative years in classrooms of between 15 and 18 where dedicated teachers got to know my children and assess their learning styles and differentiate lesson plans for their needs. These small classes allowed my children to flourish and succeed academically in middle and high school. When my experience is just one example, the research behind the benefit of small class sizes is considerable. The Institute of Education Sciences concluded that class size reduction is one of only 4 evidence-based reforms that have been proven to increase student achievement. Studies of class size reduction efforts across the country, including SAGE legislation here in Wisconsin, revealed that students in small class sizes do better, quote, do better in every way that can be measured. They score higher on tests, receive better grades, and exhibit improved attendance. And educators can see that small class sizes are an important part of a thriving school system. Second, whether in a class of 19 to 20 at an AGR school like Midvale and Lincoln, or in a class of 30 in a more affluent school like Hamilton, I fear that children with 504 plans, like my son, children with IEPs, or children of color are disproportionately disadvantaged by our willingness to make class sizes rise just a little bit more each year. While all children are disadvantaged by large class sizes, educational research insists that children with learning issues, medical issues, language barriers, or who experience poverty are more acutely affected by larger class sizes. In 2012, the study of an experiment in Tennessee to reduce class sizes showed that while small class sizes improved reading ability, mathematic competence, and listening skills for all students as compared to those in larger classes, that African American children benefited significantly more than their peers from small class sizes. Given our collective concern with the achievement gap in this district, reducing class size is an important step in reducing the academic achievement gap. In fact, one study estimated that the gap would shrink by 38% alone with this one kind of intervention.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
Mike Teitelbaum, followed by Teitelbaum. Sorry about that. I missed the L the first time I read it.
It's my name.
And followed by Opmi Obasa.
There.
You can correct me when it's your turn. Thank you. Go ahead.
So my name is Mike. I'm an MSD parent with 3 young daughters, and what I'm here to speak about is advanced learning and accountability. In my opinion, I think everyone agrees about this, every student deserves to learn, every student deserves to be challenged, every student deserves to grow. And as many of you know, one serious challenge to all this in our district is identification. We need to be identifying not only students who are already achieving beyond their grade level, but also students who have the potential to do so. But once we've done that, we then need to provide programming for these students. That can't be left up to the discretion of individual principals, individual teachers, based on their individual comfort level with advanced instruction. In every school, at every grade level, in every subject, we need programming in place to ensure that students are challenged appropriately to their level. To give you a sense of what I'm talking about, I heard a story from another parent earlier today that I'm just going to quote to you. She wrote on an email, quote, "In 2nd grade, there was a boy in my daughter's class who lived with his mother in their car. He was exceptionally good at learning math, but the curriculum didn't provide for him. The rest of the kids who were of similar ability were supplemented at home when their parents realized they weren't going to be taught at their level at school. He was not. He therefore wasn't included the occasional times the higher level kids were grouped by ability and then skill level, because their skill levels had been supplemented at home, and his had not. So he fell behind, frustrated and angry. Had the school provided an appropriate curriculum on a consistent basis, this would not have happened." The kind of curriculum we're talking about here requires resources. It requires training, but it also requires accountability so we can know what's being done. One part of accountability is assessment, and originally in this district we were only measuring proficiency in our assessments. That is, what percentage of students were at or above grade level. The problem with that is, for an advanced learner, once you reach proficiency, whatever happens or doesn't happen for you becomes invisible, because there's no way to measure it. So now at least we're measuring growth, and that's important, and that's a positive step, but some of our growth measures, like comparing to grade level norms, don't catch growth for kids who are advanced learners. And of course, accountability needs to be about more than just assessment. We need to know what's going on in each school, what concrete interventions are being made, and what programming is in place for advanced learners. Now, who's the we who needs to know this? Well, one thing is parents, like myself. There needs to be more transparency about who's been identified as an advanced learner and what interventions are being made, a bit more like what parents currently get in special education programs. But the problem is it can't just be parents driving advanced learning, because if you do that, that's a recipe for inequity. If the only schools with advanced learning are those where parents demand it, inequality is going to be the result. So each school needs to be accountable to the district and to this board. There needs to be a plan in place, there need to be goals, and there need to be reports about how those goals are being met. Otherwise, we're going to fall back on a system where only some students are challenged and only certain kids get a chance to develop their potential.
Thank you. And you're going to have to pronounce your name for me, followed by Chris Carusi.
Hello, my name is Iomi Obuse. I'm a student at West. So recently I organized a demonstration on the West Ash Steps, and it was basically because of the lack of diversity that we have at our school. We don't really have a lot of diverse teachers of color as core teachers. We see them as a lot of as elective or security guards, but not really as teachers that are going to really impact us. So what I came to talk about today was the lack of diversity and what I've seen. So most of the people, my peers, have tried to reach out to their teachers, but because of the lack of diversity and the lack of experience that the teachers have towards their students, they aren't able to connect. And this affects their education because you need to have a foundation sort of with your teacher, because that helps you not only have trust with your teacher, but it makes you want to learn. And it's important to have teachers that have the same experience with you or can connect with you, because it makes you feel like they understand you, and it makes you want to learn more. So I believe this is a problem at our school. It impacts students' relationships, and gaps start to form when you have no experience with the people that are trying to teach you different subjects. This affects not only kids of color, but also Caucasian children as well. So I feel like it's important to use my voice to speak as a student and not only talk about myself and my experiences with my teachers, but also my peers as well, because this is an issue. I've been in many, many clubs at my school, and I've seen this in pretty much all my clubs, that people are sort of angry, and I feel like it's important to not only use my voice, but to speak for my peers as well. So when we have diverse teachers, not only do they have experiences and new perspectives that they can bring into the lesson plan, which I feel is important, connecting students to the lesson, but I also feel that when you have the same different perspectives, it broadens your education, and I believe that's good for all students, not only students of color. So what I want to see happen is with Pathways, I believe that this is an amazing program that is coming to all the schools in different districts, and when you have a new program at all these different schools, having diverse teachers would not only impact your new program, which would make it so much better than it already is, but it will interest new teachers into coming. So I want to make sure it's important to note that I'm not trying to dismiss the teachers at West. We have amazing teachers at West, but with the Pathways that are coming in, new teachers are probably going to apply, and I want to make sure that they are teachers that are core teachers, not just elective teachers or gym teachers or security guards, but they're also bringing something new to our education. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, followed by Justin Shell.
Hello, I'm here tonight to talk about both advanced learning and class size, and I want to start by giving another shout out to Lori, because she really did an amazing job of covering advanced learning and fine arts last year. Ethan, welcome. As many speakers have attested, we clearly need to do a better job of reaching out to all of the learners in the district, particularly Black and Latino and Hispanic students. Advanced learning is sometimes viewed as being in competition with equity, and I think we need to look at it as being part of a robust and solid equity plan. The advanced learning evaluation identified differentiation as an area where we can do better and build our capacity. And when it comes to differentiated instruction, class size matters. Small class sizes make it possible for teachers to meet the needs of all learners in their classroom, including advanced learners. While our average class sizes in the district don't look bad, we have some classes in our district that are much, much too big for effective differentiation. For example, all the kindergarten classes at Mendota are between 20 and 22 students. Hawthorne currently has 2 fifth grade sections at 27 students. These are both high poverty students with high poverty schools with students who are homeless, students with high needs, students experiencing trauma, and those class sizes are much too big for staff to be able to meet the needs of everybody. MAP test scores are currently the primary way that we're identifying advanced learners, and this is a good way to identify advanced students, but it shouldn't be the only way. One problem with MAP is it's not identifying students in the very early grades, and I feel like, especially if we're going to do a better job of diversifying our advanced learning program, we need to start identifying kids very young and supporting them. And secondly, while humans are biased, we also know that standardized tests are biased. So we need to take that into account when we start identifying. Being identified as an advanced learner shouldn't depend on having a parent who can come to school and advocate for you, and it also shouldn't be dependent on your ability to afford a tutor so your kids' MAP scores go up so they get identified. I strongly support caps on all class sizes so that teachers can better meet the needs of all of their learners, especially their advanced learners. Our teachers already do an amazing job of meeting the diverse needs of students in inclusive classrooms, and I highly value those inclusive classrooms. Smaller class sizes will help them successfully differentiate instruction for all learners, including our advanced learners. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker tonight is Justin.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to talk about a couple of things, I think playing off a little bit of what Mike said earlier, but speaking to a couple of things that I saw in the presentation that I think we're going to see later today. One thing I'm really encouraged about is seeing the item, developing school level action plans. I think that's a really great idea. I think it's a way to take the district level vision and goal and develop something customized to the school. If we can make sure that that plan stays updated and fresh and reflects the any changing population dynamics in the school. It also is constantly reflecting what kinds of resources are available to teachers, because I think that's, as the teacher develops the individual student plan, they need to know what kind of resources they can use to help that student, which then I think goes into my last topic, which is is when we look at how our students are progressing, we're looking at growth. And it's something I've mentioned in the past, but I'd really encourage you to, in addition to looking at how students grow within a grade level norm, also consider looking at how they grow within an instructional level norm. So comparing students, regardless of what grade they're in, what age they are, students that have a 250 in math, compare them all and see how they grow against each other, because I think that gives us a little more interesting way of looking at how we're providing resources to individual students. I know that my concern is that in the past I've heard the district say that as students get into the advanced learning side of things, we would expect them to grow slower because they're already at the upper end of their norm. But with RIT scores, in my mind, it takes that away, because a 250 is a 250 is a 250. And so we can very easily compare a kid in the 4th grade to a kid in the 10th grade. And that's all I have, so thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all our speakers. And as you might guess, our main topic tonight is advanced learning. And Jen, did you want to introduce Ethan and Lisa probably, and probably Lori too?
Yeah, you named the trio. Why don't you guys go ahead and join us? I'm actually not going to say a whole lot and let them dive right into it. Lisa Quisted, I think you all know, is our Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. Lori has been our interim head of advanced learning this year, as well as the Director of Fine Arts. I think I just gave you a promotion there with the title, but why not? And then, of course, Ethan Netterstrom is joining us. We're thrilled to have him on our team. And I'll hand it right over to Lisa to get us going.
So welcome to the conversation tonight. We see this as a great opportunity to talk about our advanced learning plan and what we learned from the external evaluation. So I'm just going to put a little framing on this and then move forward with the plan. So just wanted you to know that tonight, as we discuss the advanced learning plan, that this is really about us executing on the work moving forward. I think sometimes talk a lot about planning and things we're putting in place, but we want to be sure that we're really talking tonight about how we're going to execute on our ideas. And those ideas are really centered around executing on the work that will allow access and opportunity for more students of color and more of our underrepresented students, and providing challenging advanced opportunities for students who are already identified as advanced. We see the advanced learning plan really is an equity strategy because of that, and it will be built off what we've learned in the past couple of months. So as you know, the external review was completed in the winter already. Ethan, how long have you been here?
About 60 days.
60 days, Ethan's been here. So the external review was completed just before he started. And I just want to remind everyone that we asked for the external review. We embrace it, we asked for it, and we embrace the work moving forward. And that was one of the reasons that we hired Ethan, because we heard in his interview that he was here and he was ready to embrace the work moving forward. It was the first external evaluation in our cycle of 3 years, and boy, did we learn a lot. We will learn some things to apply to the next external evaluations. And it was really interesting because when you have someone else come in and take a look at programming, it can sometimes identify trends and patterns maybe that we've seen but we question, and it can push us to think about some other things and some new ways of working. So sometimes external evaluations miss the local context because they don't have them like we have them, but actually it's also elevated the conversation to the board, right? Like we have a structure and a framework now upon which to talk about advanced learning. So I think that that's an important note as well. So we found out some things in that external review, that there were many parents that were very happy with the services that their children were receiving. And we also found out about some areas that were highlighted for improvement and growth, which is what we'll talk about tonight. So I'd like to thank Lori Fellons as well for her leadership on this interim basis. Lori and I got to know each other really well over the course of the last couple of months. And just shortly, I'm going to let Dr. Ethan Netterstrom kick it off moving forward with the presentation. So I think that we're going to ask that you hold your clarifying questions till the end. We're going to get through each of the areas because I think there's some overlap and we might be able to answer some questions along the way. So certainly if something is burning, we don't want to hold anyone back, but just want to think about a structure moving forward.
I'm not the technology director. See, that's why. Okay, so these are the areas that we'll kind of go through, and we're starting out with some background and the progress and some things coming into the role that seem to be going well, and other things where we're looking, as Lisa had said, areas of focus definitely. I'm going backwards now. There we go. Okay, so some of the background, again, the advanced learning plan that has existed and us taking a look at it, and the RMC having looked at it, and what changes need to be made going forward. The staffing model currently is AL, IRTs, Advanced Learning Instructional Resource Teachers or coaches or specialists, have been working across 2 or 3 schools, and with the board action a couple of weeks ago, now it'll be half-time at each, so no more than 2 schools per person. So that's going to be a big benefit for us, and the things that you'll see outlined going forward that we're going to ask of our staff to do. The identification goes across the 5 domains, general intellectual, the specific academic areas, leadership, creativity, and the arts. So you'll see our recommendations and our plans according to those. Yeah, and those again will guide what we're doing. So the way the presentation is broken down is along with the 5 topics that RMC suggested. So you'll see that. All right, so the progress so far, the main thing for me coming in externally, I've been a principal the last 8 years in a row and an assistant principal before that. So one of the very first things for me was to meet with principals and find out what does this actually look like in schools, on the ground, like what's actionable. So I've been going to the schools almost all. I've got to hit a couple more, but just about. Also meeting with all of the advanced learning staff, some of the MPAL and other parent meetings, and just going through it and seeing what kind of trends are coming up. So you'll see some of the main things, and again, this will be outlined in the next couple of slides. But they're the same things that parents mentioned tonight. So it's good for me, having just joined, to see that the same things I'm seeing, many parents are seeing or advocating for. So that's great. Things around the identification process, getting a larger diversity of students identified and serviced as well. The communication piece, which has been large. So all these different things, again, which we'll outline in details. So coming in, one of the other things was seeing what have we been doing well and what's currently going on. Knowing we have a lot of really good AL IRTs working into schools and really doing the best that they can with the systems and structures that are in place, but knowing the more we systematize those and the more support we give them, the better they're going to be able to do their work for students as well. So we had a parent advisory committee that's been providing feedback. There is some processes of identification in place, and definitely a main thing was the data cleanup. Lori, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Sure, I'll just quickly speak. So during the time I was serving as interim, one of the decisions we made is that our current identification data is housed in OASIS, but we had data around students who we called monitor status, or where there was some data but they had not been formally identified as having a need. We made the decision to move all that monitor data out into a Google platform because it was clouding our ability to clearly see who had been identified and what needs were identified. So the data all still exists, but as we go forward looking at how that data prior to an identification being made lives and intersects with the OASIS data is something that we'll be looking at.
And for me, again, coming into that was huge. I'm so appreciative that we have that level of data clarity so we can keep moving forward. Also, math seems to be going very well of all the different domains, like the systems and structures and the collaboration with the math department and the use of iReady has really set some really good models for what other things might look like too. And then as part of the OCR resolution, of course, increasing access to honors and AP classes has been, for more students, has been a big thing too. So I set up some guiding questions that I'd ask you to please think about while I go through the next couple slides, and when we're done, would like to get some feedback on those, and of course any specific things as well. But do these areas that we've identified make focus? Will they have high leverage and have a positive impact on our students? Because that's ultimately what's important. And what's still missing that we just don't have in here, for whether it's context or something that we've not thought out. So the first of the 5 areas, and again, these are the same titles from the RMC external review, the identification of advanced learners. So there's a couple things here. The main things that stand out really for me are making sure that we have really good processes that are equitable and promote access across all the 5 domains that we discussed. And seeing what we're currently doing, what screeners, and using universal screeners so that all kids are being looked at to see what skills or potential they have. So again, as one of our parents mentioned, we're not waiting for parents or teachers to nominate students, but we're really being proactive and looking at where students are at. So COGAT and MAP, iReady, and for some of the other things, the U-Stars tops, and we discussed portfolios for arts too at the earlier grades. So some of those pieces, and making sure, again, we're being proactive in this. Another thing that pops out is we currently have local and group cut scores at schools. They're already made by the assessment department. They already exist. It's just a matter of, are we using them, or using them with fidelity, or actually digging to what that means. So looking at students who are high performing but also have, again, the potential to be high performing if we give them the advanced learning and we give them supports to make sure that they're being able to access it. And that'll help us identify more students and better identify students at schools too. So all that to say, once we've done all those things and flesh those out over the summer and get them ready for the final proposal, that we're communicating it really well with our stakeholders, right? So we're not doing it in isolation and still having this like black box that you don't know what's going on behind it. We want to be very clear with what we're doing, so that way we can get feedback from parents and board members and teachers, and really understand what we're doing.
We just wanted to highlight one item on this slide. It's the USARS TOPS tool. So the Using Science, Talents, and Abilities to Recognize Students is the USARS, and then PLUS is actually the piece that comes after in that tool, promoting learning for underrepresented students. This tool, the USARS TOPS tool, is a 9-domain tool that allows us to look at potential in K-3 students. And although we already have the tool in the district, it has been underutilized. And so one of the areas, it's listed under leadership, creativity, and the arts, because it has curiosity, creativity, leadership domains, but it also looks at other areas like spatial ability, et cetera. And so that's a real promising tool for us to begin this identification look at K-3.
So the second area, curriculum instruction. So one of the main things is just building the capacity of our AL staff to do a whole lot of things, to support and coach teacher teams, support them in data analysis, professional development, so them directly providing PD to school staff, but also participating in the PD that goes on at schools, so that they can be part of those teacher teams and support like a AL lens to things that are going on already, so it's not an isolated piece. And then when needed, direct services also. So one of the things that came up again from one of our parents, the focus on differentiation is huge. That's got a lot of leverage, not just for students with advanced learning needs, but all students in a classroom. So the better we can support teachers in using MAP data or other data to do flexible grouping or plan instruction, it'll give them more opportunities to meet the needs of more kids in their classroom, not just kids with AL needs. Another piece is just collaboration between the department and the content area teams, so making sure we're not making up things in isolation. So having ongoing meetings with the science, math, literacy, social studies, PE leads, and seeing what do they currently have as far as pieces for AL and where can we support so that our staff aren't making things in isolation, but they're aligned to the core great teaching model, so it all meshes together. That's going to be very critical too. The school level action plans, I think that's one of the largest pieces for me. Definitely being able to figure out what we're currently doing in schools, and then how do we monitor it, track it, support it, and help build it. So like what kind of things do we need for school to support AL? Like what's the minimum they need to be able to do? And then what's the next step, and so on? And how do we increase our capacity to move between those levels and steps, and just how do we help them help their teachers, help our students? So that's kind of what those are. And then making sure that those plans aren't like a document you put on a shelf and never look at it again, that they're a living, real document that myself and the AL staff and the principals and or teacher leaders sit down and look at those a couple times a year at the schools and see how do we support them. So it actually becomes a piece of the school culture. Yeah, I mean that's going to be one of the largest leverage pieces.
Just to add a couple points on this, I was appreciative of the public comment around the school level action plans. I think that is right on. I think that it will help inform our support to schools and support to a principal. And then I also want to say the second star about collaborating with content area teams, that I don't think we can underestimate. It is really important that Ethan and his team have access to our teacher leaders in literacy and math and science and social studies. Those are the content, those are our core content areas from which differentiation occurs, and I think that is really going to be key moving forward in teaching and learning, that those teams work together. So I see that there's a lot of room in that area as well, and I just wanted to call that out.
Okay, so our third piece around communication, and again, this is a lot to do with the clarity and transparency around AL and AL initiatives and work. So one of the pieces will be moving from the Parent Advisory Committee to AL Advisory Committee that will draw from parents, of course, other interested community stakeholders, teachers, principals, AL staff. We'd like to invite high school students as well, like to really get a diverse view of perspectives and use this venue to both present data from our findings as the year goes on, share plans, get feedback, and really have it a public venue so that the department can be accountable for what we're accomplishing and doing, just in a very open way. The website Chris has been working on for us too, a parent community piece to it, but also a staff piece to it, so that parents and principals and schools will know, like, at what point of the year different things are communicated out. What is the model for that? When should we be looking for communication? What kind? Just so that there's some standardization across how we communicate. And I know the ALIRTs are looking for that too, definitely. And then transitions, which someone had brought up earlier today too, really looking and seeing if we have a K2 school, what does that look like when they move to 3-5, or that to middle school, middle to high, and where are we possibly missing opportunities in that step, and how do we make it a better process for kids, especially knowing that the IRTs need to communicate between schools, and so do principals around, like, placements in classes or cluster grouping or things like that. So definitely focusing on that too. So our fourth one, our staffing model. So definitely the big piece of stabilizing it was, thank you for the early approval on that to make it 0.5. We've already developed postings and we're getting them out to try to find some staff too. And that's also helped us move some folks around too. So like, we have 2 schools that are K-2 and getting one person to go across 2 K-2 schools who has like early elementary background. So we're being more strategic about where people are placed in schools too. And just being very collaborative around it and what the role of the ALIRTs looks like. So again, we talked about briefly earlier, just the teacher team support, the coaching, the PD, direct service, and the case management aspect of it with the data input. It's a lot of pieces, and knowing that this is a start, and some principals have allocated portions of full-time employees towards this too. So some schools even have more, depending on what their need is. And so looking at that model going forward and figuring out how do we support that? Does it need to be increased in certain schools or what over time? But right now, knowing that this is going to give us a really good start to figure out what's working well and leverage those things in the schools. And the other piece will be supporting high schools where there's not ALIRTs, but working with counselors to make sure to promote access and principals and figuring out what the data pieces look like at those schools. And I'll be taking a hand in meeting with them and trying to work those pieces too. So our fifth piece, last one, sorry if I'm going a little fast. How we hold ourselves and our staff and our schools accountable for AL. So this, the trackers are references in here, not the same as the school level plan, but this is how do we make sure our ALIRTs and myself too are supporting schools in the correct way. How are we communicating? How are the plans getting implemented? The overall plan, the school level plans, and how do we make sure that we're doing that and make sure that when we're not, there's a course correction to it. So we are. Part of that is just the consistent identification and making sure we're using things that eliminate cultural bias and that again are proactive and universal in nature, and we're making sure we're identifying kids and then again meeting their needs once they're identified. Because if we just identify them and then don't meet their needs after, we're making it worse. So making sure that we're doing both pieces of that. Again, looking at all the domains, especially like leadership and creativity, which there hasn't been as many things going on as something as, say, math, and figuring out what that needs to look like. And then again, as Lisa mentioned, the collaboration with other departments and is going to be very important to make sure everything meshes together well and everything is supportive of our kids. So the next steps piece before the feedback. So we'll have open collaboration pieces. The ALIRTs will be doing some meetings in June and July to flesh out and discuss the processes for identification, the other pieces, and make sure that we get all of their input. And then having more open meetings, which I'm hoping to host not just here but at schools, so that people can come out to them and provide feedback. And we'll set up a structure for that, and then getting a draft to the board in the summer, so that way we can continue to refine it over the course of the summer and have something more polished and ready to go in the fall, and then we can start implementing right away. That's the huge thing for me, is not taking another half a year or a year to plan, but like we need to do this now with some urgency, and that's where I'm coming into it.
The other piece that we've learned in the development of some of our other plans was it's important to get feedback in the front end. So when you don't quite have so much there, when you're developing the frame, but it's also really important to get feedback once a draft is created. So we wanted to be sure that both of those opportunities were built into the timeline.
I mean, so that's what I have to share at this point. So I'm hoping to get feedback and questions and all the pieces.
What I'd like to do is, if to the extent possible, as you recognized and by going through it all, is that these are interconnected areas.
Yeah.
But to the extent possible, with board members with questions and things, I'd like to kind of work through them, area 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sure.
And if that falls apart, it falls apart. But I think that kind of will allow us to interact with each other in a more structured way. And so I'll start with, Nikki had her hand up. Do you have just a general question or something with area 1? We'll start with a general question. It's already falling apart, but.
Sorry, TJ.
You try.
I never really followed structure very well. Sorry about that. But one thing I've noticed, and it's actually planned, but there's very little dual exceptional students who are both gifted and disabled at the same time. Is there specific ways of tracking that and to focus on diversity to make sure they still have access to those areas of learning?
Yeah, I would say if we look at the local and group norms, we can definitely use diverse learners. Special ed is one of those things. Coming from a school, we definitely, as a principal, had many kids who were on both ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
I think that actually fit into identification, so we didn't mess up there.
Oh, cool.
Dean and then Kate.
Yeah, on number 1, the second bullet, I'm curious about this tool that you referenced. Is that a What is it? Is it a test that someone checks off?
So they actually come in the form of a folder, and within the folder, it's divided into the 9 domains. And this is the author's description. It's both teacher-pleasing and non-teacher-pleasing behaviors that indicate strength. So it really looks at, sometimes leadership, for example, can come out as a student who's defiant, but it's because they're actually defiant because they're trying to assert their leadership skills, and it's not being acknowledged. So it's a great tool. It looks at frequency and intensity. So it's administered by an adult who would observe a group of kids, or you can zero in and actually use it to observe a singular kid, but looking again for trends across these 9 domains of frequency and intensity of behaviors. And it's a great way to look at a group of students minus the assessment scores that we often are using to look for traits in both core academics, as well as the leadership, creativity, and the arts, which have been a little bit more challenging in terms of universal screeners within our district. So I think there's great potential for those 3 domains.
Who does it?
It can be done by a classroom teacher. It can be done by another adult in the building. It could be done by an ALIRT. So I think it's determining. And although they recommend a frequency rate of 6 weeks, sometimes you can do it in dosages much smaller than that to take some snapshots and then zero in on a few students who can be observed more closely over time.
Do you have to be trained up to do it?
There's a training that comes both an online and computerized training, but we've had Mary Ruth Coleman here a couple times, and we were actually just recently looking into what it might mean to bring Mary Ruth Coleman back into our district to do some training here actually in the district.
I have a general question, but I'll hold it. I have on point 1. It feels like there's sort of 3 areas of identification. One is sort of core academics, that and proficiency, right? What can you already do in academics? 2 is leadership, creativity, the arts, and then 3 is this idea of potential, and what one could do, right? So what I've kind of seen, and I think a lot of what we've spoken about through this evaluation process, we do a pretty good job on that academics. What can you already do? We use MAP, iReady, et cetera. It sounds like there's maybe some potential for leadership, creativity, and the arts. I still feel really passionately that advanced learning should be identifying potential, and it's just like this fantastic way for us to engage with children from a strengths-based perspective of how they come to us and kind of grow the things that they're passionate about and talented at, instead of a deficit-based kind of idea. And I just don't see, I guess I'm confused. How are we identifying potential? And can we simplify it, right? Like, do we need to give kids iReady and MAP? And so 2 separate questions, but the potential piece is I guess I'm confused about how we're going to. I have seen these like fantastically brilliant kids fall through the cracks because we don't have a way to do that. And
Yeah, I think part of that for me goes back to that 3rd bullet, like the local group cut scores, and knowing like right now looking at some of our identification pieces and seeing that some of them cut off at the 95th percentile. Like, you're catching very few kids, whereas if we move to the 90th or 85th or 80th, or if we looked at like taking kids from lower economic top 10%, looking at MAP or some of these other things, we're going to catch kids that normally we've just not been servicing. I think that's a piece of it, and I think once, like with the U-Stars TOPS piece, once we get better training and implementation of some of the things we have, I think we're going to catch some kids that we're currently not. But I think a big piece of the potential is making sure that we're also supporting the kids that we've identified in this newer, broader way, to make sure that we're not identifying them and just saying, okay, now you're advanced learning, good luck to you. We're supporting you while you're doing that. So figuring out what those strategies with the core content teams looks like so that we can do that. I think those are some of the big
Okay, those feel really different to me, lowering the threshold on a proficiency test versus a completely kind of spatial reasoning, et cetera,
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
understand you to be saying. So I would encourage us to have clarity on which path we believe, I don't know which one is better, but which path is a better way to do that.
I think it's pieces of both of those paths, not just one or the other.
Anna?
Just clarification around the U-Stars. Would that screener then be, here you have it under leadership, creativity, and the arts. Could that screener be used for general intellectual or the domains?
It absolutely could. Like the other areas I hadn't mentioned yet, like for example, shows motivation is one of the areas, and then there's characteristics of what motivation might look like. Another example is showing strong interest in something. So just the strong interest, but then it's characteristics of what strong interest could look like. Again, from what we typically might see, but then there's some characteristics in that list that might, again, be non-teacher pleasing, that show someone has a strong interest and their needs aren't getting met. So I think it's a combination with what Ethan said of us looking at local and group norms, but then we need to be looking at these other domains and these areas around potential, and that's what this tool will help us start to get at. So in answer to that, it's leadership, creativity, and arts, but there's absolutely areas where we can use the information in general intellect and the core content areas.
My turn. Couple of things. First is that with each of these sections as we go through them, I think that as you know, Lisa said on the front end, it's good to have these things when we're going into a revised plan. And I think one of the things is, and we talked a little about this in private, was that to think about what, and a couple parents brought up in different areas, what are the meaningful metrics? And what should be, in terms of, identification, what are we, we've moved numbers in various different ways over the last 6, 7, 8 years, in 10 years in this district that this has changed. And there's no kind of sense that this is how we want the numbers to move. It's just, clearly, increasing percentages of underrepresented students, but as you said, that if it's just names in a database, that's kind of meaningless. And that goes to the second thing, particularly with this one, but I think it also touches on the other ones, is I reviewed the plan as it exists now. And in light of Chris's comments about her discussion with the IRT today about, are we still doing that in terms of defining advanced learning? I think some real clarity around defining is important. And I think especially when we start talking about using local norms and we start doing, and right now the definitions in the plan, is an advanced learner is a student who demonstrates high performance capabilities or who demonstrates the capacity for high performance. That's a huge definition. I don't know what that means. And then there's a secondary definition later, which isn't much better. But I think that, again, that a couple of parents, again, talked about accountability. Mm-hmm. And if we don't define what we're doing, then it's hard for us to, we can feel good and we can point to areas of progress, we can point to areas of continued frustration, but we don't have a path to what we want. So, and I think that, that's particularly applicable to identification, but also to other things. Then the second thing is that I do think that we need to be, and this goes back to, what do we mean? Does a high cut, does the top 10% of an underrepresented group, does that mean someone has potential, or does that just mean that they've reached their potential and that they're rocking it? And how you interpret that is really, and is someone who is, overall 15% lower than someone else, but is in the top 10% of their group, from an instructional perspective, does it make sense to treat them the same? And I think that these are real questions we have to grapple with. The numbers look better when you use those kind of group norms and when you use local norms, but from an instructional, how do you make that? And if it does indicate potential, then that's great. But if it's simply just a way to throw more people into a bucket and it doesn't make instructional sense, and I think that's got to be, we have to be very explicit on our practices around that. So that would be my comments. And Nikki and James, did you have your hand up? Or are you just thinking? Mary has her hand up. So Nikki and then Mary.
I would have to agree with TJ on the needing more well-defined terms. Whether it's writing legislation, working on law, the hardest thing you can ever do is define what you're working on. However, it happens to be probably the most important out of it. And I think it would be very helpful because we're dealing with a large number and a large number of groups. I think we need to be as specific as possible so we don't miss people.
Mary?
It seems to me that we have the issue of identification, but then we have the issue of once we've identified how, as you had mentioned, Ethan,
Yeah.
that if the instruction does not meet the needs of the children, the identification really isn't
Right.
important. So in thinking about how the needs are met, it feels to me like it comes down to the teacher's ability to differentiate instruction, to challenge that student. Is that true?
I said that's a factor. I think the more teachers we have who are really able to differentiate instruction, they're going to meet a lot of the tier 1 needs, like kids who are able to, if a teacher can differentiate, yes, they're going to hit more needs, but there'll always be some outliers who might not have their needs met in that same grade level classroom. But for the most part, yes, I agree with you.
So would you say how far out, not grade level, but
Yeah.
within, what's the range of the needs that should be met within the grade level classroom?
Yeah, I think it does go back to depending, I guess, on the classroom. And so the more we can get principals and teacher teams to cluster kids so that there's not like, let's say I have 4 fourth grade classrooms and I put 1 advanced learner in each, it'll be much harder to meet their needs than if we put 2 together or 3 or 4 together. So the more you have groupings within, the easier it would be. Being new to Madison, I don't have a really good feel for how well any individual teacher can differentiate. But the less, stay lines across you have, the less RIT bands you have, the easier it is.
So that actually is my question about
Okay.
how much we implement, sort of getting into how we actually implement the differentiated instruction. Currently, do we, to your exact example,
Okay.
do we have, if we have 1 child in each of those 4 same grade level,
Right.
4 classrooms, are we pulling those 4 and are they in the same classroom with the teacher who is best perhaps suited to differentiate? But there we're depending on one
Yeah.
teacher who might be better able to get the professional development, perhaps has the experience, can do that. Are we doing that right now? Where
I
we
would
pull
say
the,
it's school dependent. Based on my brief time here, I would say it's dependent.
so that to me seems like just a basic, like just common sense
Right.
almost, after the identification. Then within that, there's certain students who will fall outside of
Right.
the differentiation. So would that be one of the top priorities
That would,
for
that would definitely be something in the-
increasing our level of meeting student needs by having that clustering at least within the grade levels within each school?
Right, and right now the ALIRTs make the recommendations to the schools who then hopefully take them. But yes, that would definitely be something that we would put in the school-based AL plans. And the overall AL plan is a recommended practice or wanted or needed practice.
So while that seems to be a almost no cost
Yeah.
alternative, so there must be a reason that we haven't implemented that across the board.
I think there are all kinds of beliefs across the district about
Yeah.
clustering and inclusive classrooms and homogeneous classrooms and heterogeneous classrooms. I think that the key to what you're talking about, Mary, and I'm speaking from sort of my experience as a principal and as a teacher, is that grouping has to be flexible for kids. You might have students who have a real talent and are really advanced in math. I mean, it's sort of like fluidity across the tiers, right? So a student who
Yeah,
might be
right.
really advanced in math might actually need to be in a grade level literacy class to hear the language and to get involved in the dialogue. And might be, right on grade level in science or social studies, but in math, you might have a first grader that is doing really advanced math concepts. So it's a skill of a teacher team to flexibly group and to work with each other. And if this is my team, I have to trust Lori that if she's taking 2 of my little ones in math, that I know they're being really well served over there. So just from a boots on the ground perspective, it really does take a flexible group to do that, and not sort of once I'm in Lori's room, I'm in there all the time. I do think that we need to do better support to teachers and teams around flexibly doing that to meet more students' needs. But if you have 4 little ones that are doing advanced math across 4 rooms,
Right.
I mean, there's no way that a teacher with all the diverse group of needs, English language learners, students that are struggling, it's really hard. A teacher
Right,
can't
yeah.
differentiate every minute of every day all the time.
I think that's what I'm trying,
Yeah.
because in some ways it seems like we, and maybe it gets to Nikki's point, but what are we trying, what's the end goal here, and what's even possible, right? And it's not possible to have every teacher in every classroom be able to differentiate, or I would say the probability is very low. And so how do we make the best use of?
Yeah.
Which gets us into area 2, which is about flexible grouping.
Jen, did you want to?
I was just
I
going
just
to
want to actually say that we've transitioned to number
I
2,
think
and that's what you were going to say also.
Helping you out.
And
Yeah,
I also want
yeah.
to say that one of my hopes for the evaluation was that we had a better that we'd come out of it with a better understanding of the clustering practices in our district, both with advanced learning and with special education, as well as English language learner and a few other places where we're clustering. And I think that one of the things that, I don't know whether it's within the AL plan or something, but I do think that we have to get a better handle. And as you said, it it varies for good reasons and it varies for bad reasons from school to school and grade to grade even. And you have to at some level trust your principal's judgment for matching up students with peers and matching up students. But I'd like to understand how we've implemented clustering policies, and I really don't know. So just to have a window into that, you talked about things being a black box. I think that's a huge black box in this district. Anna, you were, and then Kate?
Yeah, I also was seeking more information around the clustering. I feel like we have made data requests around clustering for our ELL students as well as our students with IEPs, and we can get that. So I'm assuming we would be able to get data around our AL students as well, and seeing how much they are clustered or how much they aren't clustered. I think clustering for advanced learners has been something that's been in the forefront for a number of years, and advocating for that. So I guess moving forward would be helpful to have that information, whether that's accurate, that we have 1 kid sitting in every classroom, or do we have 8 sitting in one classroom?
And I think that's part of when Ethan was talking about accountability plans, school action plans, and then also accountability plans for advanced learning IRTs. Well, it's not a tracker in this rigid sense. It does provide him sort of with a sense of guiding questions around what actually is going on at every school and how can he stay on top of it. So it would illustrate for us, there are 6 little ones in 6 different classes and they all need this. Let's talk about how we're going to meet their needs. So I think that's the end goal when we talk about really knowing how people are spending their time in schools and really practically what's happening in schools with kids.
Kate?
So I was maybe going to flip the dialogue, which is I think the last 3 or 4 comments have all been on sort of what does good look like, where's the end goal, how are we defining what success looks like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but I'd also love to hear this group's thoughts, and same thing, maybe flip the question on the clustering. I mean, to the degree that it varies across the different schools, what do we believe is right or would look good?
Nikki? On clustering, I have some very definite opinions. I think kids can learn from other kids, so I don't want to remove all diversity and put everyone the same. I think that would be boring. At the same point, you have to look at grade levels, you have to look at individual learning styles. But what I worry about, I remember hearing from other teachers trying to, when we cluster individuals like in math or in science who have learning issues, it does, and the number of issues a teacher might have behaviorally trying to handle that, I am wondering if there's enough individual attention if you have 5, 6, 7 in the same group.
So I just want to clarify too that I don't mean, because I want to make sure we keep the difference between like tracking, clustering, flexible grouping. Like I'm not saying these kids should always be thrown together all the time. That's like tracking to me more as
Okay.
like I think Lisa was mentioning, like if we're doing math and maybe teacher pulls us
Okay.
group, whether it's a middle group, AL group, a different group, you know, based on need, and looking at math and things, those needs could change during the year too. So just want to kind of be wary. I think my definitions are maybe different than here. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you meant flexible grouping.
Yeah.
When you made your
Yeah.
comment.
Okay,
Ethan?
just wanted to make sure.
Dean?
Yeah, a couple of things about, I was struck with Chris's comment about trying to define what advanced learners are and what it is. And one thing that I think we get, maybe our conversation is a little bit too one-sided on the use of differentiated instruction in only advanced learning curriculum. Many teachers are doing this already because they have to, just dealing with their own kid, with their own classroom.
Yeah.
Never mind that trying to find advanced stuff for advanced learners, just trying to get the curriculum that they have across. You have to do it in a differentiated way. So it's a really tough skill to do. We know that. So that providing professional development on differentiation is not just for advanced learners techniques. It's something that we've been trying to do across the board for quite a while, and it's a real tough thing to do, as Mary was suggesting, and that we all already know that. So that's one thing that when we try to define what advanced learner is, it's not just those kids that are getting differentiated instructions. That's across the board. Every teacher's got to learn how to do that at some point, and every teacher already knows that. And I guess the only other thing that we should kind of maybe there's been a lingering belief. I wouldn't say an attitude, but a belief that it's a luxury, and it's not.
No.
It really is just trying to teach us to find out where the level of ability is with a kid, and then give them something that they can deal with. And so advanced learners isn't a luxury. Similarly, like special ed isn't just something we have to do. It's all something that's important, and being able to implement it in a way that a teacher can do is a real so a lot of what we're talking about here. So it doesn't apply just to advanced learners. It's across every classroom and every school.
A couple of things while we're still on slide 2. I think that the general idea of school level action plans and sharing those with school communities is good, to the extent that that privacy allows for that, and the transparency around that. And I also think that the collaboration with content area. I mean, one of the things about the ALIRT position that I've always been uncomfortable with is that it's a generalist, and that the students' needs tend to be concentrated in very special. Tend to be, not always, but in specialty areas, and generalists work really well K-5, 6 to 8 it starts to lose it, and by high school levels, and a lot of our K-5 kids, or some of our K-5s are working at high school level, and so that's so I think that collaboration is very good. The one thing more generally, and it's highlighted here, is am concerned that we're using the map data for things that the map data is not designed to be used for, and that it's kind of our go-to on almost everything, and it's really not designed as an advanced learner identifications tool, and so I think and it's not really designed as an advanced learner accountability tool either. And just to one of the parents here, that actually RIT score grows actually they compress towards the top. Someone, I can't remember one of those, and that there is more room at the bottom in general. I mean, that's just an artifact of how the norms are work with that. But something that there are. So I think that I'm not saying we have to use anything else, but I think that we always have to pause and ask ourselves, what is this tool designed for? Is it what are the how far are we stretching it by using it in these ways? So that's what I got on this side. Anyone else on this side, or should we move on to the next one? All right, communication. I think we touched on.
Can I add one thing? Just one thing on your content.
I missed you when I turned to see what was next.
On the content areas, I just would second the point. I feel like this is a really important area, and it feels almost like we're identifying fewer children in the areas where we don't have a landing place for them. And so if we create the landing place, particularly with some of the arts, I think, if people believe there's a place for folks to go, and with potential, right, there's an easier path to identification there. So.
All right, thanks. And again, apologies. Communications, efficiency, and effectiveness. Much here. Anyone want to get us started, or people, and will we take silence as meaning that these all sound really good?
TJ.
Anna, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I was rereading myself.
Just looking at the first one around provide feedback and accountability through the new AL advisory committee. I guess my question is, has this been created yet?
So the structure of it, yes, I have it, but has it been implemented? No. So we just wrapped up the last AL Parent Advisory Committee in the last 2 months. So going into the summer, we'll do open sessions for the plan, but we'll also be soliciting and trying to get folks to sign up for that. And so one of the, and it'll kick off in the fall, because then we'll be able to reach out to make sure all the parents and teachers and folks coming back to the schools can get on board, and definitely trying to get multiple people from each school. So there'll be a couple pieces to it. There'll be a data presentation, discussion, feedback, but then we also want to link it to voices in the field, or practitioners, or people that might be a draw for folks to come out and listen to. So it's not just the drier pieces, but it might be like certain SEL topics or things that would bring folks out, and then do that piece, and then hopefully most or all stay for the other part. So the structure, the framework we've got set up, it hasn't begun yet.
Yeah, and so for that advisory committee, will those have to be people that are either tied to advanced learning because their children are participating in it, or?
No, so it'll be completely open meetings, and we'll want anyone who's interested to come, even if they don't have children in the district, just anyone with any interest in the topics, or providing feedback, or seeing what we're doing. Yeah.
Excellent. I look forward to seeing that. That's kind of a new model.
Yeah.
Dean?
Yeah, I'm assuming you're going to get our friends from the UW's names and contact, or have you already been in contact with them?
No, we haven't met yet.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I think collaborating at the university level has shown some promise for us in other things we're doing, and might as well take them up on their offer. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I had spent some time meeting with Scott Peters and some other folks when I got here, but we just haven't met yet, so we'll definitely agree with you.
James?
Communication. Historically, we have not done a very good job of reaching underserved populations. I don't think there's any question about that. I think that's debatable. I think if you look at our surveys and our results and those who participate, we always question why it is we're not reaching certain groups. When we talk about parent and community, are we integrating our own staff and structure here in the district? For example, we have a parent involvement group. So is that group involved in this, or is it separate? I mean, have we looked at how do we incorporate all of our own divisions within MMSD, for example, our parent involvement group? Will they be part of this? Should they be part of this? So I don't know if that goes into that bucket or what we haven't thought about or what have you, but I'm asking it here. Because it's an area we got to get better at, right? We have not been able to reach these groups. And so it's one of our problems that maybe we should be more vertically integrated with how we are structured in the district. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just chime in a little bit on that, James, because Nichelle and I have talked about it. Our superintendent's parent advisory committee has been really interested in having kind of representatives across the various parent groups coming together in some more integrated way, because as you know, we have a handful of different groups that are happening simultaneously, depending on kind of area of interest or concern. So just letting you know that we have been talking about that and would love to figure out at least a few times a year when those groups are coming together across teams. I don't know if you
Yeah, that, and I also think a big piece for me will be that we have our advisory meetings in the community, so it's not requiring people to come down here, but let's do it at the high schools on both sides of the city, and really, that's almost like a roadshow kind of thing. Let's go out and embrace the community and get their input, not sit here and wait for them to come to me, because they won't.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's just that even with that approach, you still have difficulty getting underserved groups even to come to those local events. And so, and I know we talk about establishing relationships with the university. Well, the university has its challenges reaching those groups also. And the university has challenges for years. And so, it'd be good to see that somehow we bridge this issue that we've had in this district forever about how do we reach these groups. And I have another question to talk about, just some structure issue. I'll ask you later about, whether or not, the way we're set up, we were talking about clustering. I won't go backwards, but if clustering has an issue, does clustering provide a structural issue with integrating advanced learning classes, for example? Because we're getting into the comfort issue here of the fact that we don't have many people of color in those classes, that we're clustered all the way through our system. So, but I'll talk a little bit, ask that question a little later.
Nikki?
Just a quick question answer to James's issue. Is there a way with events already in the community, we set up a table? We set up a way that Juneteenth, we set up a way at other events, so that way we can go where the people are instead of making them come to a separate event, go to one that they're already at.
Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
No, I think that's a good idea. It's not easy, but I think those are some of the events that that I think you have to have some attendance at to, break down some of the barriers. Yeah.
All right, shall we move on to effectiveness of all approaches in meeting needs / create school-based advanced learning incentives, accountability systems, and metrics? That's next, right? I skipped one? Oh, I skipped one. See, that's why I asked. Advanced learning staffing model. How can I skip that one? I didn't mean to. I'll talk about this one, which is, and we had these conversations last week too also, is that I really think that that defining and prioritizing the multiple roles of IRTs is essential in the next plan. That, there's 3 or 4 major tasks that they're charged with, and you want to give them flexibility to meet the needs of their particular community. But I think that there has to be a certain level of priorities here. Is that, is supporting differentiation more important than identifying, where do these lay, and get some kind of sense of how we're using our resources there, and just, if I would identify, and this isn't, I haven't looked at the job description in a while, but 1 is identifying students, 2 is supporting teachers in meeting the needs of students, which includes differentiation but goes beyond that. 3 would be direct services to students, and 4 would be connecting students to programming and services elsewhere. And I, if I'm missing one, I'm not sure. But those all could be full-time jobs. And so I guess that we have to have a sense of priorities here. Because though Dean says that, this is not a luxury, within the realities of public, and it's not a luxury, but within the realities of public schools, there are levels of services that we can and can't give. And again, we could have a full-time person doing each of those activities in every school, and they'd be busy. That's something we can't afford. That becomes a luxury. So with what the resources we have, what are the priorities is my biggest concern around the staffing.
So I think you just asked a question about role clarity. I guess I have the same question writ large, which is we have 23 ish folks supporting 5,000 students, all of whom are supposed to have an advanced learning plan, which requires some form of identification, communication, drafting of a plan, and then for some of those children, an intervention as well. And it's hard for me to get my head around, and it goes back to the question of what good looks like, right? Where are we going to draw the finish line? And I think that is a needed input to the next dialogue we have. But is the IRT model structurally able to do what we want? Is it not? If not, what other? I don't know the answer, but I think it is a question that I would appreciate your thoughts on, just because it feels like, it feels challenging to dramatically increase the resources there. It's the second biggest student population in the district. If you so this is a lot of children, and we believe there's more out there that aren't identified right now because our identification is so spotty. So, what's the best way to support?
Yeah, I think a big piece of the ask for the increasing the allocation a couple weeks ago was that my vision of the ALIRTs is them really helping the schools to develop the systems and structures to do a lot of this work, and them supporting the schools in providing the actual instruction in the classrooms, whether it's a differentiated instruction or if we're identifying enough kids at each different tier, then you have a larger peer group. So the larger your peer group, the more important it's going to be for the classroom teachers to help meet those needs, and less on one half-time individual at a school. So I think it's a lot of systems and structures and case management type of work to get the pieces moving to the next level. I think that's why the need for more folks right now, and seeing what that looks like over time, I think it's something we need to explore in the plan and as it unfolds. I agree with you on that.
And I know Ethan and I have had, and Lori too, have had conversations about what are those expectations around systems in the end, and at what point do schools sort of have greater autonomy to deliver those services, greater flexibility, so to speak. And that the piece about incentives, when do you know when a school has that set up, is what we want to try and figure out. There's lots of grown-ups in schools. You have coaches and interventionists and advanced learning IRTs and MTSS coaches sometimes. And how do you better utilize all of those people with all their skills and smarts to meet the needs of more students? That's what we're grappling with too, and I think we'll continue to think about. So we're with you.
Yeah, I think there's the flip side of that, though. In this report, I think there was about 25% of instruction being delivered through non-IRT, non-teaching staff for AL students through someone else, right? And so I also wouldn't want those students to be receiving primarily their instruction from either non-licensed staff or from technology. So, where's the balance of
Totally agree.
of that?
I would have to agree with Kate on that. How are we not going to overburden our teachers? Right now we have teachers who are dealing with large classes, they're dealing with professional development, they're dealing with a variety of challenges. How do we get this done without overburdening the classroom teacher who's saying, I already have enough on my plate, just making sure everyone learns. I don't know how I can get this done.
Just kind of picking up on that is that to some degree also I believe we're outsourcing most of our leadership work to partners and things like that. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's my impression that previously and so that's another place where, no.
Are you meaning with the
Well, we had the G-Safe program, and then there was
Or
another
student
one too.
leadership?
There was another one that I can't remember what it was, but there was
Yeah.
another partnership that I thought we were doing leadership work with.
I've met with GSAFE for quite a few, but
Yeah, I seem to remember
Wow.
two, and I don't remember like that we were doing a whole lot internally other than that. And those are partnerships, so they're semi-internal. I can't remember the other one, but maybe my memory's going. Yeah.
We get the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just, kind of around. Now I think we move on to metrics and accountability is the final thing. And I guess I'll start out in saying that both in terms of, Kate has phrased it very well in that what does good look like?
Yeah.
And I think that, that related to that is what does progress look like? And one is in terms of the plan, I think that defining those terms within the plan itself is very important. But secondarily, I think that as we go for a new strategic framework, that are there elements that could be tracked via that in terms of AL things. And in some, both kind of developing maybe more I didn't even hear you, but I heard
Heard Siri.
In terms of, I think that we want more detailed and more interactive and holistic metrics within the AL plan itself. But, 2 or 3 things to pull out and say that this is at least candidates for the strategic framework. Maybe they won't make the final cut, but I think that having that part of the discussion would be useful.
So related to that, one of the questions that I want to sort of my hold questions was how do we want to kind of play the interplay between pathways, AL, ELL, right? There's other kind of standing programs, but also I think Pathways has a lot of potential to support. I don't know the right way to think about it, but it feels like there's something there, particularly around our creative and arts and leadership advanced learners. And who really right now, if you look at the interventions, are relying on enrichment only, right? There's really no other than math and literacy, and even some of those are enrichment, not instructional supports. They are enrichment activities that are supportive for our kids and challenge them, but aren't necessarily kind of moving them through instruction at a different pace. And for my understanding, at least, of our arts and music and leadership is the same, that there's not really kind of a path there. So I don't know how that works together, but it feels like there may be some opportunity to use those resources.
Lori looks like she has something she wants to say, and I actually want to hear what Lori has to say. So
I'm going to say back what I think I hear you saying, and that is that through our K-12 art and music curriculum, we don't necessarily have the leveled opportunities for students who are advanced in those areas. We have the core offerings and we have differentiation. I think when we look at the adolescent experience for middle school, we have an opportunity to reimagine what that could look like. And I agree with you that Pathways and the future of our comprehensive high school model moving into a Pathways model gives us an opportunity to look at access in a new way to the arts. I think with K-5, when I look at that, I would challenge, though, that we do have opportunities in arts integration that are just kind of coming on the scene in the classroom that are starting to challenge kids in new ways in art forms we haven't been challenging them in before. So the straight on art and music classes, I agree with you. The time, the frequency, the dosage in K-5 art and music are very limiting. But if we can start to reimagine how kids can access the arts outside of that as well, that can be instructional, and that actually can really lead to some project-based learning in the classroom. And I think that's one area that we have not yet as a district really gone there, but there's pockets in classrooms around the district starting to do that work. So I'm optimistic that that will help us address some of that.
So maybe, and then this will be my, I think, last thing I'll say, but for when we kind of revisit this topic, there's 3 things that would be really helpful for me. One is that question of what does good look like, right? I think I've said that. The second is what you were just talking about, which is, can you just give us a flavor of what the instructional intervention really is for our 5 areas? And that doesn't need to, it doesn't need to be a list of programming, but, literally what is it that kids are going to be doing? Is it flexible grouping? Is it arts integration? Is it some of the extracurricular activities listed in here? And then the third would be just a real clear sense of identification. And I just would really encourage us, the fewer the better. The list of identification potential tools right now, I think, creates lack of clarity, particularly for families coming into the system, not knowing, what the threshold is, where, and I would encourage some simplification to help families understand and staff understand the path.
I'm going to intervene for a second on James. I just want to, Lori, just to clarify, I know 2 or 3 years ago I heard maybe a half dozen kids talking to our teachers who had been identified in the visual arts and I know that they were beginning to talk about providing supplementary instruction and services. Kids like 5th, 6th, 7th, the 2 of them I'm thinking were like 5th going into 6th kind of age. Did that happen, or was that? And I'm just curious, and we're probably talking only a couple handfuls of kids, but just in response to Kate said that was all available, and the last I heard about it was just kind of started getting rolling, and I haven't checked back on it. So
I think it follows the theme of a lot of the other things we're talking about. It's very school dependent, right? So there's pockets where we're starting to see both with like an intervention enrichment block where people have figured out a way to do that supplemental instruction, but some of it's tied to the scheduling model that a particular school uses, whether they've got the time to build in something like that. So it's very building dependent.
So there was a smattering of it going on, and there's still probably a smattering of it going on, but
that's right. It's not systemic.
District-wide or systematic. Okay, James.
Yeah, just a question on preparedness. For example, when we talk about literacy, we talk a lot about making sure kids are reading by 3rd grade. Otherwise, as they move forward, we're going to have all kinds of difficulties. So when we talk about identifying advanced learners, and especially in these later grades, I guess my question is, are we comfortable with where we are in preparing our kids K through 5, K through 8? Because we know that the group that we're trying to reach and increase the participation of, we have some issues there. For example, around math, by the time they get to the 9th grade, we already have some algebra issues, for example. So what's your thoughts on, where are we with this whole issue of preparedness? It seems as though the pool gets a lot smaller by the time you get to high school with some of the issues in the early grades if we're not focusing on those, building advanced learners earlier.
Yeah, I think the earlier we can identify kids with either high achievement or potential, or some of the other pieces like the desire, like if we can give more interventions early for any kids, not just kids with advanced learning needs, that's going to serve us really well. So looking and seeing how these, like we talked a bit about MAP, but we don't use that at K-2, so figuring out what things we do use and how we can better identify kids and support them. But I think you're completely correct. The earlier we identify kids for anything, the more supports we can give.
So it sort of feels like, when we talk about these things, we've been at advanced learning, we've changed the name a few times, it sort of feels like we're starting over. It always feels like we're starting over instead of building. And so I guess I'm also curious, so where do you feel we are at in terms of preparing our kids now that's in K through 5? Where are we at? We talk about what's a success, we have these questions. I never seem to get a feel for where we are. It's almost like we're starting over again. And we're at the beginning. We should be along this peripheral here. We should be moving along some path here because we've been at this for a few years. So instead of feeling like we're starting over. So do we have some thoughts where are we in terms of preparing kids in the early grades to be identified? We get to this whole thing about identification. It seems as though the pool is shrank if we haven't prepared them early on.
Yeah. You guys remind me of the grade of the universal screeners.
So we're doing portfolios in 2, and then 5 would be like so 2 and 5.
2 and 5. I think that's important. And because I think, that we've made a huge push with preparedness. And we've seen elementary results get better and better over time. I expect to see the same thing happen this year with our early grade literacy work, which means we should, at least on the academic stuff, we should be capturing more and more of those second graders through the universal screener. But I think I share your frustration. I don't feel like I have a clear enough handle on where we are in terms of capturing kids at the universal level. So I don't know. I think that's something we have to tighten up. And this kind of feeling that we keep having of kind of creating a new plan and the restart. I remember one of you guys used that exact term the last time we had a big AL discussion. But we have made progress. I do feel like we're having a hard time capturing the progress. And I know that the speakers brought up this term accountability over and over again. Chris has been talking about accountability for years with me, and I think that I do feel like I know the school-based plan seems like a small thing, but it does feel like a essential missing piece. It's made it hard for us to really capture where we are and measure our growth. So I don't know. Do you guys want to add to that, especially about the universal?
That's a big piece. Like you said, catching the kids with the universal screeners, being more proactive in the school-based plans, and working with the principals, IRT, and myself to actually sit down and monitor it and have public data shares on it is a big piece. Personally, I'm planning on staying here long enough to make sure this works, so you don't have to keep restarting it every person or two. So hopefully that helps.
Appreciate that. Anna?
Yeah, the one area that I'll be very interested in moving forward and looking at it is the bullet around the implement consistent identification procedures and protocols across all schools to eliminate cultural bias.
Me too.
This I've always find this intriguing because the procedures and protocols that we currently use are culturally biased. So I really think we're going to need to look closely at that and look at alternatives, because I'm not as familiar with the COGAT, but it seems as though it's giving, it's screening out the same population that we were getting with the MAP. So that will continue to be an area that I'm really interested in, and I really think we need to improve that to make sure we're reaching all the students that have the potential and have the ability, because I don't feel like we're doing that right now.
We used to use a nonverbal screener in addition to the COGAT, and I'm not quite sure why we phased it out. The Naglieri. Thank you.
That's it.
We used to, and I don't know if I think we made limited use of it or something that wasn't universal, but we did use it. And I think that when we look at biases and we look at, I think that they're probably better getting a potential using a nonverbal screener than what we're using. That's, an educated guess, but a guess. I think we're on the next step slide in general. First off, I want to thank you for the work and thank you for listening and responding to the questions here.
And welcome.
Thank you. And welcome. I think that you'll be back to us early August with some kind of progress report and probably a draft at that point. And is this anticipated for an August or September revision adoption? Does anybody know?
I think September is what we're...
September?
aiming
Okay.
for.
And I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense for everybody. Final thoughts from anyone?
No, just thank you. I thought this was Ethan and the team's chance to get some early thoughts on where they're headed with the plan. I think we got what we needed during this meeting. Yeah, so we're just looking forward to getting to work on it and bringing you more clarity in the next round.
And before we adjourn, I believe Amaya, is this your final meeting?
It is, yeah.
And so I think we need to recognize your service and thank you for your service. And I don't know if we do that. It's not an agenda item, so I'll say thank you and we can do that. But it's been a pleasure serving with you.
Amaya, do you want to announce to everybody where you're headed after you leave us?
Sure. This fall I'm headed to Duke University to study public health and public policy.
Do you want to make the motion to adjourn? No. Jeff, the guy, I did not hear that.
I moved to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Kate.